The Zelthorian High Commander Varrical never knew fear, not in the visceral sense. As one of the most feared warlords of the galaxy, his name was synonymous with precision, ruthlessness, and unbroken victories. He had traversed countless star systems, led campaigns against rebellions that spanned entire quadrants, and crushed species who dared oppose Zelthorian supremacy. Yet, as he approached the cerulean sphere of Earth aboard his warship, unease clawed at his insides, an unfamiliar sensation that he struggled to rationalize. The humans had been the wild card of the galaxy for far too long. Rapidly advancing from primitive technology to spacefaring capabilities in just a few centuries, their rise defied all known galactic patterns of development. What unnerved Varrical the most wasn't their unorthodox tactics in battle or their surprising resilience under duress. No, it was the whispered rumors that reached even the most remote sectors of Zelthorian influence, the whispers of humans being a species no one wanted to provoke. For decades, humans had remained largely self-contained, only intervening when provoked. Their military victories were rare but decisive. Despite their relatively small sphere of influence, species across the galaxy had grown reluctant to engage with them. It was why Varrical had been dispatched by the Zelthorian Senate to assess Earth's military capabilities firsthand. He would infiltrate their system under the guise of diplomacy, tour their facilities, and return with intelligence that could shape the future of interstellar strategy. Earth's atmosphere shimmered as his shuttle descended into the stratosphere, flanked by a pair of Terran fighter crafts. Commander Varrical had studied human vessels extensively, and while they appeared rudimentary compared to Zelthorian engineering, there was an underlying efficiency to their designs. He observed the angular surfaces of the fighters, their adaptability, and the subtle scarring from previous battles. These were ships that had been used, not paraded. When the shuttle finally docked at the Human Military Academy, Varrical expected to see some display of grandeur. He anticipated the arrogance typical of militaristic species, a procession of advanced weaponry, meticulously organized troops, and towering monuments to their conquests. Instead, he was greeted by a simple landing bay with scattered personnel in functional but unimpressive uniforms. His escort, a tall human named Colonel Natalia Hayes, greeted him with a curt nod. "Commander Varrical," she said, her tone professional but devoid of deference. "Welcome to the Academy. I hope your journey was comfortable." Varrical straightened his posture, towering over the human officer. His mandibles clicked softly in what the Zelthorians considered a gesture of superiority. "Comfortable enough. Your accommodations are adequate?" The colonel smirked, a subtle but irritating display of confidence. "Follow me. I'll give you the grand tour." As they walked through the halls, Varrical's sharp eyes noted the peculiarities of the academy. There was a rawness to the place, an understated efficiency that contrasted starkly with Zelthorian opulence. The corridors were unadorned, the training facilities practical rather than extravagant. Humans moved through the space with an air of focus, their conversations sparse but purposeful. They passed a group of recruits running through an obstacle course. Varrical's mandibles twitched as he observed them. Young, unassuming, lacking the physical prowess of most galactic warriors. Yet, as he watched closer, something else caught his attention. They moved with a determination that bordered on obsession, their bodies pushed beyond what seemed reasonable for their limits. One recruit fell from a high wall, landing awkwardly. Varrical expected them to be removed from the course, but instead, the recruit dragged themselves to their feet, blood dripping from their palm, and climbed again without hesitation. "They're fragile," Varrical remarked, his tone dismissive. "Yet stubborn." Colonel Hayes glanced at him. "Fragility is subjective. Resilience is universal. What you're seeing isn't stubbornness, it's necessity." Before he could respond, the tour continued into the simulation chambers. Varrical was struck by the sheer variety of scenarios humans had developed to train their soldiers. The holographic displays ranged from tactical ground battles to zero-gravity combat, from infiltration missions to full-scale planetary evacuations. Each simulation seemed designed not only to teach strategy but to immerse the participants in conditions as realistic, and as harrowing, as possible. "They train for war as if it's inevitable," Varrical observed. "Such pessimism is unbecoming of a species with limited territory." Hayes' smirk returned, though her eyes carried a weight that unsettled him. "War isn't a hypothetical for us. It never has been. You'd understand if you knew our history." "History is irrelevant," Varrical snapped. "It is the present strength of a species that determines its place in the galaxy." Hayes didn't reply. Instead, she led him to the combat training grounds, an open arena where squads engaged in live-fire exercises. Vericale's mandibles flared slightly as he saw the intensity of the drills. Human soldiers moved with a calculated ferocity, their teamwork seamless despite their individual shortcomings. He noted the diversity among them, different physical builds, skin tones, and even equipment. It was a chaotic contrast to the uniformity of Zelthorian forces. Yet, despite their lack of uniformity, they fought with an unrelenting ferocity that made Vericale's scales itch. The highlight of the tour came when Hayes escorted him to a classified facility. Vericale expected advanced weaponry or experimental vehicles, something that would justify the whispers of human capability. Instead, he was shown rows upon rows of archives, each containing records of Earth's wars, battles, and conflicts. The sheer volume was staggering, spanning thousands of years. The colonel gestured to the archives with a grim expression. "This is why we are who we are," she said. "Every war, every battle, documented, analyzed, and remembered. It's not just history, Commander. It's preparation." Vericale stepped closer, scanning the holographic records. He saw images of battlefields scorched beyond recognition, cities reduced to rubble, and soldiers fighting against insurmountable odds. The brutality was unlike anything he had witnessed in his campaigns. Zelthorian wars were clinical, calculated, devoid of emotion. Human wars were chaotic, personal, and driven by a resolve that defied logic. As Vericale continued to study the records, a peculiar realization struck him. The humans had not survived their wars because of superior strength or advanced technology. They had survived because of their capacity to endure. It was a trait that defied conventional strategy, a raw determination that rendered them unpredictable and ultimately dangerous. By the time the tour concluded, Vericale found himself grappling with an unfamiliar sensation: doubt. The humans lacked the physical prowess of the Zelthorians, the technological advancements of other species, or the vast empires that spanned the stars. Yet, in their simplicity, there was a terrifying complexity, a power rooted not in what they possessed but in what they were willing to endure. As the shuttle carried him away from Earth, Vericale stared out at the planet with a new perspective. The humans were not merely a species to observe. They were a threat to be reckoned with, not because of their military might but because of their indomitable spirit. For the first time in his long and storied career, the Zelthorian High Commander felt the faint stirrings of fear. The Zelthorian High Commander Vericale sat in silent contemplation as Colonel Hayes guided him into what she called the Tactical War Simulation Center. Though the sterile corridors of the Academy had initially felt unimpressive, the increasing weight of what Vericale had seen so far began to gnaw at him. Still, he reassured himself that humans' so-called ingenuity was likely exaggerated, a result of galactic rumor and overblown fear. The simulation center, however, challenged that belief. Massive holographic displays surrounded the room, each projecting battles that spanned the gamut of warfare, from jungle ambushes to sprawling interstellar dogfights. Teams of human soldiers moved between control stations, issuing commands and making split-second decisions with precision. The room buzzed with tension and urgency, even though Vericale knew this was merely a training exercise. One display in particular caught his attention. It depicted a naval battle in orbit over a fractured moon. Human forces, vastly outnumbered by a fleet of alien ships, executed a daring maneuver that made Vericale's eyes widen in disbelief. The human flagship accelerated directly into the heart of the enemy fleet, shields overloaded and weapons firing indiscriminately. It was a suicide run, or at least it seemed so at first. Just before impact, the human ship detonated its warp core. The explosion didn't merely destroy the human ship. It triggered a chain reaction that engulfed half the enemy fleet in a cascade of fiery destruction. The remaining human vessels capitalized on the chaos, methodically dismantling what was left of their foes. The room erupted into cheers from the human operators, but Vericale could only watch in stunned silence. "That," Colonel Hayes said, standing beside him, "is the Fermi Gambit. High risk, high reward. It's used as a last resort, but when it works, it's devastating." Vericale tilted his head, his mandibles twitching in disbelief. "Your strategy is reckless. No Zelthorian fleet commander would sacrifice their flagship in such a manner." Hayes folded her arms, her gaze steady. "We do what we have to in order to win. It's not about pride or tradition. It's about survival. Survival." The word lingered in Vericale's mind as he followed Hayes into a smaller chamber adjacent to the simulation floor. This room housed individual training pods, each occupied by a soldier undergoing virtual combat scenarios. The technology itself was unimpressive compared to Zelthorian standards, but the intensity of the scenarios being run was another story. One pod displayed a soldier locked in a grueling urban combat simulation. The environment was a smoldering cityscape, every building riddled with bullet holes and charred from fire. The soldier fought alone, wounded and outnumbered, yet they pressed forward with an almost inhuman resolve. Verikael noted the grim determination etched into the soldier's face as they crawled through rubble, dodged enemy fire, and managed to disable an enemy tank with nothing but an improvised explosive device. "They're programmed to fail, you know," Hayes said, catching Verikael's curious expression. "The simulations are designed to be unwinnable. The goal isn't victory, it's to see how long they can keep going." Verikael's mandibles flared. "Unwinnable? What purpose does that serve?" Hayes leaned against the console, her tone quiet but firm. "Because in real war, sometimes the objective isn't to win. It's to make the enemy lose more than they're willing to pay." Her words hung heavy in the air. For the first time, Verikael began to understand the whispers that had spread across the galaxy. Humans didn't fight wars like Zelthorians, where the goal was to achieve clean, decisive victories. Humans fought wars of attrition, wars where the line between victory and survival blurred. "This philosophy of yours," Verikael began, his voice tinged with disdain, "it's barbaric. It lacks the elegance and precision of true warfare." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "Barbaric? Maybe. But it works." The next segment of the tour brought them to the Academy's medical wing. Verikael expected to see standard recovery facilities, rows of healing pods, medical drones, and perhaps the occasional medic overseeing patients. What he encountered, however, was something far more disconcerting. The medical wing was a hive of activity, with doctors and nurses working tirelessly on injured soldiers. What caught Verikael's attention, however, were the soldiers themselves. Many bore injuries that would have rendered a Zelthorian warrior unfit for duty: missing limbs, severe burns, scars that told stories of brutal engagements. Yet, rather than being retired or reassigned, these soldiers were undergoing procedures that would return them to the battlefield. One soldier in particular stood out. They were strapped to a table, their left arm a mess of exposed muscle and shattered bone. A medical drone hovered nearby, grafting a cybernetic limb onto the stump. The soldier clenched their teeth but remained silent, their eyes fixed on the ceiling. Once the procedure was complete, they sat up, flexing their new hand as if testing its strength. "How long until they're fully operational?" Verikael asked, his tone betraying a mix of curiosity and unease. "Depends," Hayes replied. "Some take a few weeks to adjust. Others are back in the field within days." The Zelthorian commander stared at the soldier as they stood and walked toward the exit, their movements stiff but purposeful. The idea of sending an injured warrior back into combat was unthinkable to Zelthorians. Injuries were a sign of weakness, and weakness had no place in their ranks. Yet humans seemed to embrace it, turning their scars into badges of honor. "These soldiers," Verikael said, his voice low, "they fight even when they are broken." Hayes nodded. "We don't stop fighting just because it hurts. Pain is temporary. Defeat is permanent." The tour concluded with a visit to the Academy's Central Archive, a vast repository of human military history. Verikael had assumed it would be similar to the records he had seen earlier, but the scale of the archive took him by surprise. Holographic displays filled the chamber, each depicting battles that spanned centuries. Some were from Earth's ancient past, while others chronicled more recent conflicts among the stars. Hayes gestured to one particular display, a recording of the Siege of Titan, a battle that had taken place during humanity's early expansion into space. The footage showed human forces holding out against an alien invader for weeks, despite being outnumbered and outgunned. When reinforcements finally arrived, the surviving soldiers were little more than emaciated shells of their former selves. Yet they had held the line, refusing to surrender even as their supplies dwindled and casualties mounted. "This is who we are," Hayes said, her voice tinged with both pride and sorrow. "We don't fight because we enjoy it. We fight because we don't have the luxury of losing." Verikael stared at the display, his mind racing. The Zelthorians had always prided themselves on their discipline, their strategic brilliance, their technological superiority. But humans fought with something else entirely, a raw, unyielding spirit that defied logic. For the first time, Verikael began to doubt the wisdom of underestimating them. As the Academy tour progressed, High Commander Verikael found himself led into the Experimental Warfare and Strategy Division, a portion of the Academy shrouded in mystery and heavily restricted access. Colonel Hayes waved her clearance badge against a biometric scanner, and the thick doors slid open with a hiss. The air inside was different, electric, almost humming with latent energy. The room stretched wide, illuminated by a stark, sterile white glow, punctuated by massive holographic projections of tactical layouts and schematics. Engineers, soldiers, and scientists worked side by side, their discussions hushed but intense. Every station seemed to be focused on one singular purpose: war. Yet it was the centerpiece of the room that truly caught Verikael's attention. A large cylindrical chamber, encased in reinforced glass, dominated the space. Inside, suspended in some form of pulsating blue energy, was a suit of armor unlike anything the Zelthorian had ever seen. It was massive, towering at least 3 meters tall, with thick plating that glowed faintly as if alive. Its design was alien yet unmistakably human, the edges sharp and utilitarian, with no attempt at elegance. But what unsettled Verikael most was the eerie organic quality of the armor. It pulsed slightly as if it were breathing. Hayes noticed his fixation. "That's the Archon-class exosuit," she said casually. "One of our most advanced prototypes. Built for the worst-case scenarios." Verikael tilted his head, his mandibles clicking in thought. "This construct. It appears to be alive." Hayes smirked. "You're not wrong. The Archon is equipped with a neuroresponsive AI that integrates with its pilot's neural network. It's as close to a living machine as we've ever gotten." The Zelthorian commander stepped closer to the glass, studying the suit intently. Its surface seemed to ripple as though it were aware of his presence. "And what exactly is this worst-case scenario that would warrant such a monstrosity?" Hayes crossed her arms, her face unreadable. "Galactic-level threats. Hive mind invasions, rogue AI rebellions, planetary sieges. Things that require unconventional measures." Verikael turned to her, his eyes narrowing. "And you call this monstrosity unconventional? It is an abomination. A violation of nature." Hayes' smirk faded. "We call it preparation. The galaxy isn't fair, Commander. We've learned that the hard way. If we want to survive, we can't afford to play by anyone else's rules." Before Verikael could respond, a sudden alarm blared, and the room was bathed in flashing red lights. Technicians scrambled to their stations and soldiers gripped their weapons tightly. Hayes glanced at a nearby console, her expression hardening. "Looks like you're about to get a front-row seat to a field test." Moments later, Verikael found himself in an underground observation chamber overlooking a vast training ground. The area had been constructed to resemble a devastated urban environment, complete with crumbling buildings, wrecked vehicles, and holographic projections of civilians running for cover. At the center of the chaos stood the Archon suit, now fully operational. A young human soldier climbed into the suit's cockpit, their face obscured by the visor of their helmet. The suit came alive as soon as the cockpit sealed, its glowing lines intensifying. Verikael could feel the energy radiating from it even through the thick observation window. "What are they fighting?" Verikael asked, his voice betraying his unease. "Simulated enemy forces," Hayes replied. "We've programmed the test with a scenario based on the Zorith swarm, a hive mind species known for their overwhelming numbers and relentless assaults." Verikael stiffened. He was familiar with the Zorith swarm. The Zelthorians had faced them centuries ago and barely survived. "You're pitting one soldier against the swarm? That's madness." Hayes gestured to the Archon suit below. "That's not just a soldier. That's the point." The simulation began, and Verikael watched as hundreds of holographic Zorith drones flooded the battlefield. The Archon stood motionless at first, its glowing lines pulsing in rhythm. Then with a sudden burst of speed it moved. The suit blurred into action, its massive frame belied by its agility. It leapt onto a collapsing building, its arm transforming into a massive cannon that unleashed a beam of energy, vaporizing a swath of the approaching drones. The suit's other arm extended a blade that shimmered with plasma, cutting through enemies like a hot knife through butter. But it wasn't just the suit's power that caught Verikael's attention, it was the precision. Every movement, every attack, was calculated and efficient, as though the suit and its pilot were of one mind. Even when overwhelmed by dozens of drones, the Archon adapted, using its environment to create choke points and bottlenecks. Hayes watched the display with a satisfied expression. The Archon isn't just a weapon, it's a force multiplier. One soldier in that suit is equivalent to an entire battalion. Verikael couldn't tear his gaze away. The Zelthorians had long prided themselves on their technological superiority, but this was something else entirely. The Archon was a fusion of human ingenuity and sheer, unrelenting willpower. It was a weapon born not out of ambition but necessity. As the simulation came to an end, the Archon stood amidst the wreckage, its armor scorched but intact. The holographic enemies faded away, leaving only the silent, imposing figure of the suit. Verakael felt a chill run down his spine. Impressive, he admitted reluctantly. But this is still a weapon of desperation. It speaks to your people's inability to achieve victory through conventional means. Hayes turned to him, her expression unreadable. You're right. It is desperate. But desperation is where humans thrive. The final stop on the tour brought Verakael to the Academy's Hall of Valor, a grand chamber lined with statues and holograms commemorating humanity's greatest warriors. Each figure bore the marks of their struggles, missing limbs, battle-worn armor, faces etched with determination. One statue in particular caught Verakael's attention. It depicted a soldier standing atop a pile of rubble, their arm raised in defiance. The plaque beneath it read, Captain Naomi Reyes, Defender of Earth. Reyes led the defense of Earth during the Epsilon incursion, Hayes explained. The enemy thought they'd broken our defenses. She proved them wrong. Verakael studied the statue, his mandibles clicking softly. He had always viewed humans as primitive, chaotic, and undisciplined. But now, after seeing their academy, their soldiers, and their technology, he realized he had been wrong. Humans were not weak. They were survivors. And survival was their greatest weapon. As Verakael prepared to leave, Hayes offered him a parting remark. You wanted to understand humanity, Commander. Now you know. We don't fight to conquer. We fight to endure. The words stayed with Verakael long after he left the academy. For the first time in his career, he found himself questioning whether the Zelthorian Empire truly understood what it meant to face humanity in battle. And the thought terrified him. The sleek Zelthorian vessel, Eminence, hummed with energy as it ascended from Earth's surface. High Commander Verakael sat rigid in his observation seat, his four-clawed hands gripping the armrests tightly. The images of the human military academy replayed in his mind like a haunting symphony of chaos and ingenuity. Despite the luxurious calm of his ship's interior, Verakael felt far from secure. Across from him, General Varek stood at attention, waiting for his report. The general's greenish exoskeleton glinted under the artificial lights, and his four eyes flicked between Verakael's grim expression and the stars outside. Well? Varek finally asked, his tone sharp. What is your assessment of the human military capabilities? Verakael exhaled slowly, collecting his thoughts. They are far more dangerous than we ever anticipated. Varek's mandibles twitched. Elaborate. Verakael leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. They are not like us, General. The humans do not fight for dominance or expansion. They fight because their very existence depends on it. Every strategy, every weapon, every soldier is a testament to their will to survive against impossible odds. Varek let out a dismissive click. Survival alone does not win wars. Superior tactics and technology do. We have those in abundance. Verakael's eyes narrowed. Do we? The humans have something we lack, something that cannot be measured in data or schematics. Resilience. They have mastered the art of desperation, turning it into an unstoppable force. If we were to provoke them, we would unleash a tide of destruction that even the Zelthorian Empire might not withstand. The general stared at him, unmoved. Are you suggesting we abandon the campaign against them? I am suggesting caution, Verakael replied firmly. The Archon suit I witnessed, one soldier wielding the power of an entire battalion. The field exercises their adaptability, their brutal efficiency. They have prepared for wars the likes of which we cannot comprehend. And their soldiers, General? He paused, his mandibles clicking softly. Their soldiers do not fear death. They embrace it, knowing their sacrifice will ensure their species' survival. Varek scoffed, shaking his head. You've allowed yourself to be intimidated by their theatrics. Humans are chaotic, undisciplined, and primitive. Whatever weapons or strategies they've developed, they lack the unity and precision of the Empire. Verakael's claws dug into the armrests. You are wrong, General. Their chaos is their unity. Their lack of precision is their strength. They are unpredictable and that makes them dangerous. Do not mistake their adaptability for weakness. Varek waved a claw dismissively. Your report will be reviewed, but I believe you've overestimated their capabilities. The High Council will not abandon centuries of expansion because of one unsettling tour. Weeks later, as Zelthorian High Command. The High Council chamber buzzed with activity as holographic displays projected detailed reports of humanity's defenses, drawn from Verakael's reconnaissance. The High Commander stood before the council, his posture stiff as he recounted his findings. Rows of Zelthorian dignitaries, their ornate armor gleaming, listened with varying degrees of interest. The humans have prepared themselves for annihilation, Verricael concluded, his voice steady but grave. Their entire military philosophy is built on the assumption that they will always be outnumbered and outgunned. They have embraced asymmetry as their advantage. To engage them would not be a war, it would be a prolonged catastrophe. One of the counselors, a regal figure with golden markings across her exoskeleton, leaned forward. You speak as though they are invincible, High Commander. Are you suggesting the Empire should fear them? Verricael hesitated for a moment, then spoke with uncharacteristic resolve. I am suggesting that we respect them. To underestimate humanity would be to invite disaster. The chamber erupted into a cacophony of clicking mandibles and buzzing voices. The counselors debated fiercely, some dismissing Verricael's warnings as paranoia, others acknowledging the gravity of his observations. Amid the commotion, the Supreme Chancellor raised a clawed hand, silencing the room. Her deep, resonant voice filled the chamber. High Commander Verricael, you have served the Empire faithfully for decades. Your insights carry weight. However, the Council must consider the larger context. Humanity is but one species among many. The Empire has faced countless adversaries and prevailed. Why should they be different? Verricael straightened, his voice firm. Because they have nothing to lose. Their desperation makes them reckless, and their ingenuity makes them lethal. I have seen it firsthand. If we provoke them, we will not face soldiers or fleets. We will face an entire species united in defiance. They will fight until the last breath, and they will take many of us with them. The Chancellor regarded him with an inscrutable expression. Your concerns are noted, High Commander. The Council will deliberate further. The final decision. Days later, Verricael received the Council's verdict. The campaign against humanity would proceed. Despite his impassioned warnings, the Empire's leaders were unwilling to abandon their plans. Humanity was seen as a minor obstacle in the grand scheme of galactic conquest. Verricael returned to his quarters, the weight of inevitability pressing down on him. He knew the Council had made a grave mistake. Yet, bound by duty, he would follow orders. But as he stared out at the vastness of space, a chilling thought crossed his mind. Perhaps the humans had prepared for this exact scenario. Perhaps they wanted the Empire to make the first move. 3 months later, the Battle of Tau Ceti. The Zelthorian fleet descended upon the human colonies with overwhelming force, their ships blotting out the stars. Initial skirmishes went as expected. The humans retreated, their forces seemingly unable to match the Empire's might. But then the tide turned. Human forces launched a counteroffensive with brutal precision, utilizing tactics and technologies the Zelthorians had never encountered. Entire Zelthorian battalions were wiped out by coordinated strikes, ambushes, and devastating weaponry. And when the humans unleashed their Archon-class exosuits, the battlefield became a slaughterhouse. Verricael, stationed aboard the command ship, watched in grim silence as reports flooded in. The humans were not just fighting back, they were winning. His worst fears had come to pass. The final transmission from the ground was a chilling message from a human commander. You wanted war. Congratulations. Now you have it. Epilogue. Months later, the Zelthorian Empire issued a ceasefire, its fleets shattered and its armies demoralized. Humanity had proven itself not only a formidable adversary but a force to be reckoned with. The galaxy would never underestimate them again. High Commander Verricael, now retired, lived in quiet isolation. He often replayed the events in his mind, wondering if things could have been different. But deep down he knew the truth. The humans had not sought war, but when it came they had fought with the fury of a species determined to survive. And in doing so, they had reminded the galaxy of a simple, terrifying truth. Humanity's greatest weapon was not its technology or tactics. It was its unyielding will to endure.